Are we headed towards World War III? Stay tuned as we discuss. I'm KJ, and this is the 8:30 show. Today is Thursday, February 24th, and welcome to the 8:30 show. I'm KJ, and every Thursday night you'll find me here at 8:30 p.m. on YouTube at Metro Conservative Media. Please hit the subscribe button and give me a thumbs up. At the same time, I'm also live on Facebook at the Metro Conservative Media page. Please like our page and join the conversation by commenting on this video. I will respond to your comments during the show. This is a show where I chat with various individuals about their conservative journey. Tonight is a little different. Tonight I am talking with Shekinah Hollingsworth and Nathaniel Gavrinsky, who will join us a little bit later, about the Russian conflict, the Russian-Ukraine conflict, and how it will affect us or may affect us here in the U.S. All right. Shekinah, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be here.
Yes, it is. I'm excited to talk with you. Just so if you guys, if you don't know who Shekinah is, you've been kind of living under a rock here in Maryland. She is an American First conservative candidate for Maryland House of Delegates in Harford County's District 34A. All right. So we're going to get right into it, Shekinah. Last night, of course, the Russian military started attacking targets all over Ukraine. I want to give the audience a little background here. It was not just the eastern regions, the separatist regions of the Ukraine. It is also all over Ukraine, including near Kiev. Russian military has crossed the border in a wide variety of places. This is, in fact, a full-scale assault on Ukraine. Vladimir Putin is suggesting this is a denazification of Ukraine. He called this a special operation. He suggested this is temporary and not an occupation. He's going to denazify. The president of Ukraine is actually Jewish. So what Putin means by denazify is he's going to set up another Russian puppet state in Ukraine by deposing the current leadership of Ukraine. And if that means killing thousands of Ukrainians, so be it. So with that in mind, Putin is calling on basically the storied history behind what has happened in the past to invoke some type of rationale in why he is invading Ukraine. The Associated Press has live updates, and they are stunning. Video clips online show attack after attack of high-profile targets. Explosions throughout the country are lighting up the sky. It is not a quiet cleanup mission, as Putin has suggested. He is attempting to fully decapitate the Ukrainian administration for not being openly allied with the Russians. Refugees have already started to pile up into Poland by the thousands and likely to get worse. So, Shekinah, my question to you is basically Obama and the West did nothing in 2014 when Russia invaded Ukraine. Is this move by Putin-led Russia now a result of decades of the West basically deciding after the Cold War that it was going to focus inward, spend tons of money increasing the national debt, cripple its own natural energy independence, and kowtow to aggressive foreign powers like Russia and China in order to avoid conflict? Is this why we're here where we are now?
Yeah, this definitely follows a logical progression of many events that have happened over the course of many years of weak leadership. And really, when people are describing this conflict, they're only talking about this conflict in the perspective of what this means for the Americans or our relationship to Russia as it stands and as it has stood over a period of time. But I think what's important to also understand is that when you're dealing with issues of foreign policy, it's important to not only look at things from the perspective of our country's relationship with Russia, but also how Russia perceives the United States and the decisions that our leaders are doing here. So, for example, one of the biggest reasons why Russia didn't invade Ukraine during the Trump presidency is because Trump was led from a position of strength. Whether the threats he made were sufficient or not, they were believed, and they were believed by Putin, and that was able to be enough of a deterrent for him to be entering into Ukraine. Next, you have this regime that we live under, the Biden administration, and within the first 100 days of the Biden administration, Joe Biden cripples our ability to have energy independence by re-entering the Paris Climate Accord and also halting the Keystone Pipeline. And let's not forget how devastating that was to hundreds of thousands of people in this country that were working on that pipeline and relying on their energy to come and not only give health into the local economy, but also for us to become energy independent. So when Putin sees all this happening in the United States, he's sitting back and wondering, well, how can the United States, how can NATO or any so-called democratic country tell me what to do as a sovereign leader of my nation about human rights or war crimes, abuses, or anything else when all of this is happening at the hands of the American regime? This is negatively impacting Americans. And on top of that, you also have the Biden administration weaponizing things like the intelligence agencies that we have in the United States, like the FBI, especially after the events of January 6th. So you have all of these things going on domestically within the United States. And Putin and other leaders around the world are taking note of all of this. So really, why should Putin take seriously the threats of somebody like Joe Biden when Joe Biden is really not even loyal to the people who are in this country?
Now,
So,
I want to jump in there. I want to bring on Nathaniel Gavrovsky. Nathaniel is joining us. Let me see here. Let's see, one moment. I want to bring him on. Do we have? Okay, maybe a little bit later in the show. One moment. Let me see here. Okay, we have him in a moment coming up. I wanted to ask you. I was going to ask him, but I want to ask you also. Oh, I think we have him. Let me see. There he is.
Yeah, guys. For some reason, when he went to bring me in, it kicked me out of the whole thing. So I don't know how that happened.
That's fine. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. So we have audience. This is Nathaniel Gavrovsky. Am I pronouncing your last name?
It's Gavrovsky. It's Slavic. I'm a Russian Jew, and the name is actually Slavic Jewish for the pawn that slayed the king.
Oh,
so
wow.
It's a very, very cool name. My family historically was involved in military conflicts dating back to the Tsar's times in Russia. In Poland, Lithuania, Russia, and Ukraine, and the ancestry goes through all of those countries: Ukrainian, Russian, Lithuanian, and Polish, because we were kind of right there on the border of where all the borders used to meet.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'm so happy to have you on tonight. First time on the show, as well as Shekinah. I want to go right into this because we're also, as you know, we're talking about the Ukraine-Russian conflict, and you are a political analyst in this regard. What should the West do now? What should the United States do now as far as the Ukraine-Russian conflict? What should we do?
Well, we should stop tripping over our own feet. We should also stop causing more problems than what we can actually deal with at one time. Understand that, like was mentioned earlier, like this didn't happen under the Trump administration. Trump was also very critical of NATO and what NATO's actual purpose really was, because NATO, we are paying good money, a lot of money. I mean, a lot of money out of our economy to NATO to protect European nations from Russia. But most of their energy, most of their trading partners are actually not the United States. And a lot of it is actually Russia. They are their biggest trading partners who we're paying to protect them from. Also, Trump was very critical on American foreign policy, and that sometimes we cause a lot of our own problems. That if we don't expand eastward into former Soviet states, Russia's not going to have a problem. Russia doesn't have a problem with NATO as long as we don't move any further over. Then he has no reason to attack. Legally, internationally, there would be no credibility. There would be no support for him, even within Russia, to have a military expansion outside of the current borders of Russia, if it wasn't seen that an encroaching military power was building additional military forts along his border.
What do you mean? Another?
Well, if you look at the number of NATO bases along the Russian border, either through and I'm including Belarus in this because Belarus did subjugate its own sovereignty to Russia in the early 90s. So Lukashenko is a guy there, but legally he's recognized as a subject of the Russian Federation. Even during the Soviet period, Ukraine, Belarus, the Soviet Union, and a country called Transcaucasia, which broke up into smaller republics, all had separate seats in the UN. So it wasn't like there were additional seats. But it's very complicated, and that's the problem. This is a much more complicated issue than most people realize. There are the border from Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, all the way down into Poland, Romania, is full of NATO bases. And these are not this defensive armaments. They are tanks, they are missiles, they're soldiers that could very quickly be ordered to go into Russia or into really anywhere over there. And this would be a great thing for NATO if Russia was constantly had its armaments at its border ready to move westward. That's not the case. If you look at what brought the Cuban Missile Crisis to bear down on us, was that the United States put missiles in Turkey. Now, Turkey was a border state to the Soviet Union. It bordered Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan, which was at the time called Transcaucasia. That's where Stalin's actually from. And these missiles were closer to Moscow than what Cuba's missiles were to Washington. So Khrushchev put missiles in Cuba to force the Americans' hand, and Bobby Kennedy secretly made an arrangement that they would remove the missiles from Turkey if no one made a large fuss about it. And that happened. The missiles were removed from Turkey, and once that was done, the Soviets disassembled their missiles in Cuba. We're actually replaying the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's what we're playing.
Let me ask you this, though, because what about the Budapest Memorandum? So aren't we didn't we declare that we would protect Ukraine as our ally? I think it was back in 1994. We said it
was in 1994. There are some other treaties, though, that Russia is responsible for. One was in 1992, which promises that Russia, before it was even really called the Russian Federation, it was just the Russian Republic, that Russia was forced to protect minority groups within all former Soviet republics. So this is what Putin used in Georgia. When Georgia actually took two regions, South Ossetia, and there's a little region in the northwest, which I will butcher the name of. These were groups that are not Georgian. Georgian moved in and said, we want you out. Go to Dagestan, South Ossetia, join North Ossetia, and get out of here. We want Georgians to live here. And the same way with the other breakaway region. By 1992 treaty, Russia was required by international law to prevent that from happening. Now that supersedes Budapest in 1994. And during the Georgian conflict, Europeans, including Merkel, Sarkozy, they all agreed that Georgia actually caused that problem and that Russia was in its legal rights to do what it did. Now, that makes a lot of Americans upset because, well, why did Russia just invade another country? Well, it was a legal procedure from a treaty in 1992. Now, Budapest. Right. Budapest was supposed to give protections on the sovereignty of Ukraine as Ukraine's borders were in 1992, 1994, and 4. However, the United States had determined on a couple different occasions that separated regions of any country could just declare themselves independent. Kosovo is a great example of that. George W. Bush decided that Kosovo was going to be an independent nation separate of Serbia. And one key thing to realize is that where Serbia begins and where Russia begins Russia begins its history in Kiev and Rus, the year 880. Serbia, all of the culture and all the history that is Serbia gets its start in what is now a foreign country. And the United States has just decided, oh, by the way, Kosovo is a separate country. They're going to have extended. And I'm in Iowa right now. The city of Des Moines is where a consulate is for the Republic of Kosovo. I spend a lot of time with people from Kosovo. I generally like them. I speak a little bit of Albanian, and I speak a little bit of Serbo-Croatian, which they all speak. And a lot of them don't realize that Kosovo existed because George W. Bush said so, and Serbia was never consulted.
But what about the fact that the U.S., the reason why they did this Budapest Memorandum is to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons. So this was behind.
Well, that succeeded because Ukraine doesn't have nuclear weapons. However,
they gave them up because the U.S. and the other allies said they would protect Ukraine from Russian aggressive.
That's not a military. It's not a military treaty. It was just an agreement to give the nukes back, and in return, they got a lot of aid that they squandered throughout the 90s. If you ask people in Eastern Europe right now, and especially people in Poland and Romania and Hungary, they have a much lower opinion of Ukrainians than they do of Russians. In fact, I have friends that are reporting on this right now in Poland, and one of the things that they're dealing with is that Poles are violently attacking Ukrainians because they don't want Ukrainians in Poland. They see Ukrainians as being less than Poles, and that is a horrible, horrible thing to witness. That this is happening again. Most of Ukraine, like 98% of what is Ukraine right now, 3 days ago, that was all provided after the year 1654, which Poland and Lithuania removed all of Western Ukraine, and the northern parts of Ukraine were also taken from Hungarians, Czechs, Slovaks, and the southeast was all Ottoman. And since the end of World War I, all of the south eastern part of Ukraine was added by Lenin. Most of the northern part of Ukraine was actually added by the Tsarist Russia, and the western part of Ukraine, which was never actually part of the Russian Empire, was added by Joseph Stalin in 1939.
Well, since you bring up Stalin, I want to talk about that because. And I want to ask you this, Shekinah, as far as the emotional appeal. So, Putin wishes to reconstitute the Soviet Union and reinstitute the idea of Russian greatness. He's been very clear. He has said it over and over again. It is a belief in the Russian people. It is a nostalgic sense of purpose. What happened to the idea that the U.S. was a fundamental force in favor of freedom and liberty and a belief in a higher purpose? So in situations like this, we would intervene. I want to talk about that, if you could.
Well, I think that it's also important first of all, Putin is a Russian nationalist, clearly. He believes in the sanctity of the history and the culture of his people, and he wants to conserve that as a leader of his country, which he has every right to do. And it also begs the question that, it's hard. It's hard for me as an America First conservative to look at the situation that's happening in Russia and argue about border disputes and everything else when that is not respected in this country. We're being led by a regime right now who is actively undermining our own borders. So I guess that kind of started this whole idea of, we're this pillar of democracy and we're going to spread democracy everywhere we can. I think that starts out as a false premise because you can't copy and paste an ideology all over the world. It doesn't work because you're dealing with completely different people with different cultures and different histories, and democracy simply.
You believe the isolationism then?
Well, not necessarily isolationism so much as non-interventionist. If it doesn't have anything directly to do with our self-interest, then we do not need to intervene. And as far as
equal from all sides, right?
Right,
equal
and
from
I
all sides.
understand that,
Right.
but about it not being a part of our self-interest. But when you look at the map, and let's just put it out in layman's terms, and we sit by and we let Russia take over Ukraine, then let's say China takes over Taiwan, and they start taking over these countries.
They
and you
already
have
are.
right, but you have the United States sitting here watching it because we're concerned. We're supposed to be concerned
But
about our
we have
borders.
been guilty
How
of
do
this.
what happens when there's nothing left? So they become this empire and we're sitting here, then we're next, aren't we?
No,
Well,
U.S. has
also
its
look at
empire.
the people who are telling us to be concerned about this. Also, these are the same people who, again, make these large cases to leave our southern border open. That is still unresolved. There's no contingency plan for the people pouring over our southern border. And moreover, our neighbors to the north, Canada. How many human rights abuses are going on in Canada at the hands of Justin Trudeau right now? And Joe Biden is not talking about wanting to make an initiative over in Canada to make sure that Canadians receive democracy. Nobody is talking about that. So we have to
compare. Can you compare what Justin Trudeau is doing there versus an aggression by Russia and in joining with China?
I could do a comparison with Trudeau and Zelensky.
Okay.
President Volodymyr Zelensky has jailed his opposition. He has arrested and shuttered news agencies across Ukraine. He has frozen people who are in his opposition's finances, bank accounts. And yes, there have been ethnic minorities in Ukraine under Zelensky that have been targeted and killed. These are facts that really aren't in dispute, and the rest of Europe will acknowledge that these are true. A lot of Zelensky's wealth isn't in Ukraine; it's in London. And so you see some of these behaviors that we are criticizing Justin Trudeau over, and then we're praising Zelensky for doing the same thing. The United States hasn't been consistent in this. The United States under Trump, what Trump stood for was probably the best idea that the United States could actually ever possibly be. And the type of conservatism with the American first, the type of conservatism is the best idea of what the U.S. could be. The problem is that our foreign policy has devastated globally so many different people and countries, and our track record isn't consistent. And when we say rules for thee, but not for me, it doesn't give us any credibility. And even if you followed Facebook and Twitter, there's a lot of prominent American politicians who are Trump supporters, and even some that are not, that are completely against American foreign policy and think this is, in fact, the United States' fault and NATO's fault. And they can compare Zelensky with Putin. They compare him with the president of China and with Trudeau. But all of a sudden, he's like the greatest bastion of democracy in Europe.
But what about the argument that says, okay, we understand that Zelensky is not, and I know this, he's not. But what about the argument that says we still need to be a force in that region? We still need to do something.
We would have to do Hong Kong. We didn't do anything in Hong Kong.
Right.
And they were waving U.S. flags, the entire province of Hong Kong, waving U.S. flags, singing the U.S. national anthem. There was no waving of Chinese flags. Unlike in Ukraine, where there's a divided, heavily divided multinational state of Hungarians, Ukrainians, Moldovans, Romanians, Russians, Tatars, among many others, that don't all pay homage to Ukraine. Hong Kong was clearly begging as one of our allies, as a democracy, an actual democracy, and a pure capitalist nation. We said, not our problem.
Well, that's what I mean. We make deals with Iran. We make deals with the Taliban. We make deals with the Russians. We make deals with China. Then we're surprised when these deals are not adhered to. Putin will happily trade some short economic sacrifice for rebuilding his empire. China will gladly undergo some type of trade sanctions to take Taiwan. Iran will cheerfully be excised, the global trade to destroy Israel. Again, we have China who invaded Hong Kong, and was it 2020? They're just taking over, and if we do nothing and sit by and let this happen, don't we become lesser than as an empire? Don't we come when we concede these territories?
Well, I would say if we came to the decision to do something, then the question would have to be asked, what is the appropriate level of doing something about this conflict? Does that mean we deploy troops on the ground in Ukraine, especially after the whole Afghanistan debacle that we just had? I don't think that that's a very popular idea with Americans right now, to enter into another war in a foreign country that we don't know how long this is going to stretch out for. And I think Americans honestly are sick and tired of these forever wars. And at the end of the day, this is a result, again, of poor leadership and not leading from a position of strength. And that comes with consequences. If the consequence is that our enemies are gaining all this territory, then that's a consequence that has to be had. Because at the end of the day, what this is saying to me is that this is a referendum on globalism. This is a referendum on NATO. This is a referendum on the UN and all of these globalist powers trying to bully these superpowers into kowtowing to what the globalist regime wants. So Russia and China, they're exercising the power that they have, and we handed them a lot of that power by having such deep economic ties with them. So all of this has consequences.
Well,
and we need them friends.
I want to ask you both, and I'll start with you, Nathaniel. What is the consequence of them gathering up all of these territories? What is the consequence of that to the U.S.?
Oh, well, it's not going to be a consequence to us necessarily, but it will be a consequence to others. And that's the problem with American foreign policy, is that we don't calculate the consequences to others by our actions. And this is a pretty solid, it's happening, Ukraine will cease to exist as a country that it is today. Now, there is a large segment of the Republic of Moldova that wants to join Russia, and they border up against Ukraine. So now are we going to see the collapse of Moldova and part of that nation go to Russia, part of it go to Romania? But then we also look at Putin just took Ukraine because it bordered his country and was going to join NATO, was trying to join NATO. There are 3 republics that border Russia proper. Then there's Kaliningrad that not only borders those countries, but also up in the Baltic Sea, that Germany is really close to Germany, and we can't we can't make them leave. That's Russian territory. But you have Finland, you have Norway. If they and Sweden, if they decide, well, we want to join NATO now, Putin has already got himself in a position to where he will prevent expansion of NATO at all costs. So now what's going to happen to those countries if they want to decide they want to join NATO? Putin is going to have to be equal, take them on as well. And that's not good for them. It's not good for us. It's really not good for Russia. But he's going to be stuck in this agreement that we're going to prevent NATO expansion at all costs. With the complications that it has with Kosovo, is Serbia be like, you know what? You can't take on Russia and us at the same time. We told you that we don't recognize Kosovo, and they don't. Only like 5 countries in the world recognize Kosovo. None of them border Kosovo. And so technically you're giving even more credit to the Serbs in Bosnia to separate from Bosnia by allowing Kosovo to exist. That could become a problem. And now you start seeing, even within Russia, the 89 oblasts that make up Russia that aren't ethnically Russian. This domino effect could go both ways. It just destabilizes everybody. But we have to, the thing that I need Americans to realize, and I'm an American citizen, is that our foreign policy destabilizes so much. We caused the creation of the Ayatollahs in Iran with Operation Ajax. We caused Saddam Hussein to become in power. We handpicked Saddam to take control of Iraq because of the Ayatollahs. We created, through the stupidest amount of globalist foreign policy by the United States, all the problems that the world faces right now. We created the Taliban in Afghanistan, the Mujahideen. They were funded by the United States. And in Syria, you had the State Department and the CIA funding opposite positions of factions that fought each other with U.S. tax dollars. Forget fighting ISIS or Assad. They were fighting each other with our tax money and our equipment. Our foreign policy is just...
I want to jump in here with Shekinah. I want to ask you that same question. What is the consequence of us, of Russia, China, and whoever else continually to take over territories, what's the consequence here for the West?
Well, I think the immediate consequence economically is obviously these gas prices. But to be very honest with you, these gas prices were going to rise astronomically even without the Russia-Ukraine conflict because of the dealings that we have with our current regime right now. So, I mean, the average American is more threatened by the current regime that is occupying the White House right now than any expansion that Russia or China can do. Because virtually everything that the United States government has criticized these other governments for, we're replicating right here in the United States. We have political prisoners. We're censoring people on the internet. We're freezing bank accounts. We're also not holding accountable people in other countries, especially in Canada right now with what's going on with Justin Trudeau. The people
or
who
Australia
up there are regular American citizens. Americans are sending money and food and whatever they can to the truckers. We live in a regime that is inherently hostile to its people, and that we have a globalist regime that we have to fight right here at home. So I don't think this Russia-Ukraine conflict is going to be any. I don't think it's really going to serve of any real consequence to the average American right now, especially the average dissident American. So,
well, there are reports. There are reports now that not Hong Kong, but that Taiwan is the next step. What do you guys?
There's flights. There's planes flying over Taipei. They're Chinese currently. That's happening right now. In fact, the Chinese are realizing the U.S. has no military agreement, so the Chinese are beginning to mobilize. And I don't think they were going to mobilize until this happened in Ukraine, and it prevented all to stop the quit promoting the expansion of NATO. Would have prevented Russia's claim that they have to protect their own sovereignty and their national security, and would not have prevented a precedent for the Chinese takeover of Taiwan. This is Biden's fault. 100%.
I want to go on that note. I want to go to some of the comments because we have a lot of comments. So I have Joshua who says, your guest is conflating cause and contributed to. He loves to blame the world's problems on America. Okay.
America's foreign policy, but not on Americans. And this is the globalist part of America, the deep state, as you would call it, through Article 50, that allows people that are not elected officials, that are completely unknown to most Americans, to basically dictate American foreign policy. That's how we got the Islamic Republic of Iran, and the reason why Eisenhower gave this famous speech about beware of the military industrialized complex.
All right.
Not blaming America, it is blaming globalists, and sometimes America participates in that process.
All right. Let's see here. I have Blanca. Weakness has consequences.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's true. And so that's what I'm kind of confused on with. To me, if we don't intervene in some of these conflicts, and I'm not talking about all, but some of these conflicts, doesn't that show weakness? And weakness basically causes it more like Russia, China, and other global powers to be aggressive against us. So how do we combat that?
I honestly don't think that there's any way that we would be able to intervene in any of these conflicts and have it bring us back to a place that we were pre this current administration. And that's the problem. Like, the administration started out in weakness, and there's no amount of damage control that they can do now to reverse that. And it really just starts at home at the end of the day. And what is not popular at all is getting our troops involved in another foreign conflict that we inherently have nothing to do with. So
let me ask you this. So if Trump were in office, do you think we would be in the situation that we're in right now?
No, absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
Right.
It's simple. It's simple. Is that NATO could have just not done this. Trump has criticized NATO and its behavior as being outdated and ineffective and wouldn't have seen the need. America first is not expanding NATO. How does expanding NATO improve America? It doesn't.
Right.
There's
Exactly.
too many other things to do. And NATO is just a globalist apparatus for the elites to play chess with other people's lives. And
exactly.
Yeah, I'll let
And
you take it from there because it's just horrible.
Yeah, and exactly. This is again a referendum on globalism. I mean, organizations like even the United Nations, all of these globalist organizations are funded on the backs of Americans. We're on the UN Security Council. We fund a lot of these peace projects, and more often than not, it comes to no avail. And meanwhile, the people who suffer the most is the average American. And there's nobody willing to call this out because then they're seen as anti-American or anti-freedom or some other kind of term that warmongering neocons want to throw out there. But yeah,
it's not so much. It's not labels, like she says. It's really not labels. Saying that you're pro-Trump or pro-Biden doesn't make you automatically either pro-defend or pro-let Ukraine go. It doesn't do that. It's just the objective facts that getting involved with expanding NATO in Ukraine has nothing to do with America first. And we have more of our own problems that we need to deal with. And we're driving Russia to China by our stupid policies. They actually have had more wars with each other than we have had with either one of them. They should be enemies because Russia fears China. Russia's got to worry about Chinese encroachment on its territory all the time. We need to quit treating Russia like the Soviet Union because it's not. And we gave every other republic, oh, look, you're going to be part of us now, but not you, Boris Yeltsin. You're still the Soviet Union when they clearly weren't.
Well,
and 1994, 92 were part of that.
So what does America stand for at this point on the global stage? So
a joke.
No, I mean, but we know now as far as Biden in office is a joke, right?
Everyone I know in Europe is making fun of not only the fact that the current occupant of the Oval Office shits his pants, but that our vice president can't speak English. That we have, there is not one single aspect of American culture and society right now that the rest of the world respects. Nothing.
And I get that, but I'm talking about the ideal. What should America stand for as the ideal?
What we should stand for, we should stand for America first, because one thing that these other countries seem to have under control is that they have a national identity. They have a pride in their country. No matter how we feel about what they think about human rights or anything else, they have a unified national identity, and they're going to do everything in their power to protect that and to protect their people. So that's what we should be doing on behalf of Americans. That's what we should be doing. But what we instead are doing, what America stands for on the global stage now, is social justice and all of these superlatives and these liberal ideas that just don't make any sense, and they're not contingent in reality. They don't exist in reality. We see that when we try and push for these liberal Western ideas, that they're clearly abused, they're not taken seriously, and thus we find ourselves in the situation that we're in currently. So
I want to ask you, Nathaniel, the same. What is the American ideal? I know Biden is trash, and
someone who has dealt with internationals for about 20 years and has done business with foreign nationals, government and private citizens, I can tell you what they talk about when they talk about what America should be, and that's basically off-label. That America gives you the opportunity to be an individual, to not have a label applied to you that determines every outcome that you could ever possibly find. That America allows you the freedom to be who you want to be, regardless of where you came from or your background, as long as you willingly want to participate in what America has to offer. We could be that shining city on the hill if we would quit trying to order everyone else to be like us, when if we really, this is not possible. We need to allow them to be the individuals that we and our citizens aspire to be themselves, and to let them to be a guide, to be there when they stumble, to help them up, but not make them so dependent on us that they're not able to function as an independent nation. And if you look at foreign policy in the South America, we need to be that individual. We need to aspire to allow these countries to develop who they are.
I want to ask you guys one last question because we're running out of time. This has been a great conversation. I love having you both on.
Yeah.
I want to share with you something Ben Shapiro said today on his Instagram. He says, the West is failing because it not only doesn't understand why other countries feel this way. Okay, let me back it up. The West is failing because it not only doesn't understand why other countries feel this way, but because we ourselves have given up any belief in a higher purpose. Russia and China are focused on expanding their spheres of influence via aggressive action. The West is focused on expanding its national debt and exploding the gender binary. Whatever advantages we have on an objective level are widely undermined by our narcissistic idiocy. So what are your thoughts on that? And again, this goes back to what I mentioned earlier. Again, that once we used to have this higher ideal. But what are your response to this with this message he said? I'll go with you first, Shekinah.
Okay. Well, I agree with it for the most part. I mean, the problem is that this country no longer, you find these problems because this country no longer has an identity. When we're talking about, especially with the issue of our southern border and people pouring across the border, and just with the issue of immigration in general, we constantly say, and even as conservatives will say, oh, I don't care how many people come into this country legally so long as they assimilate. What are these people assimilating to? Somebody tell me what culture it is that people are assimilating to in modern day America. What is American culture? Nobody can seem to answer that. And the problem is when we just look at America as just an idea with no history or salience or anything, then that means that idea can be transported to different places, and that the only thing that matters is that the people adopt the idea that it is. No, America is a place with borders, with a rich, unique history that needs to be protected and defended and taught to generations so that the people in this country can feel like they're tied to it. So we felt the need to try and go impose democracies in other places because we thought we were living in such a great country because of all the things I just listed. And we don't live in that anymore. We live in a country where we teach critical race theory. We live in a country where we teach people that the founders were just the most evil people in the world, and that this country was incepted in racism, and that Black people are forever going to be an oppressed minority in this country. Inherently, we are just from the top down, it's a mess. We no longer have an identity. We no longer have a culture. People no longer feel a sense of community or wanting to conserve anything that has made this country great to begin with. So until we address that, then we have no business going to other countries and telling them how they should conduct operations or march into countries or not march into other countries. Because at this point, are we even the country anymore with what's going on? So I'll pass it to Nathaniel.
Yeah, Nathaniel, last word on what.
I was at a Barnes and Nobles in Union Square talking to an Indian immigrant, and she was telling me how much she hated Abraham Lincoln because of what he didn't do for the slaves. I was actually at Ulysses S. Grant's tomb in New York City, and there was a festival of Blacks having, it was some type of dance festival. They're shooting a video for something. It was actually really cool. And they didn't know who Grant was. And as I mentioned to one of them, isn't this great how you guys are at Grant's tomb doing this, and you wouldn't be able to, the chances of the legacy of watching this happen at Grant's tomb. Like, well, who's Grant? Is he? We don't like Grant. We were never free. Like, we're not free now. I didn't try to debate or talk to her, but I'm like, there's no collectivity. There's no, everyone has their own idea of what America is to them, good or bad. And they don't even try to understand that all nations have good and bad in their histories, same as individuals, but that the United States, what its purpose has been, not for the government, not for the people who run it, not for the elites, but for the individuals. The purpose of the United States has been that no matter where they come from or what their backgrounds are or what language they speak or the color of their skin, that they have an opportunity to make a life here that no other country can offer. And if that's not true, then King James, how did he become so popular and famous and a celebrity? Barack Obama himself. Look at immigrants like Nikola Tesla, who was an immigrant. Look at the George Washington Carver. Look at all of the richness that this country has not been because of our differences, but because of the similarity, single thing that we all share in, and that the opportunity this country gives us by life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that's not afforded to people in other countries. And that is our purpose. And we have lost that as part of our identity.
All right. Wow. That, you guys, what I'm going to do is I'm going to soundbite what you said, Shekinah, and what you said the same. When you use that as my closing on every show.
Sure.
Awesome. So
one of the thing I want to leave you with is that a lot of Blacks feel like they don't have opportunity here. And there are instances to where Blacks are not treated as equals, but it's not by government. It is by a lot of these woke corporations who do not give them a fair shake. Under Barack Obama, what they call FACTA in 2008 and 2009, made it to where credit scores can be determined for housing, employment, and insurance rates. But then they have no programs to really get urban areas, especially Black areas, to be in the banking system, to have credit scores. They are forced, not by government, but by a lot of these so-called woke corporations, into keeping them down. And in reality, the growth, the ability for the United States to grow and to become a better country is going to be with that Black population. Like the Blacks within the United States could be 90% of global economic growth if they were only given the opportunity and the tools and encouragement, and it's not done. And I don't know. I need to get this out, is that if you are a Black individual, you are the best part of what America can be, and you are the best part of what America will be in the future. And I want you to go to bed, wake up every morning believing that you are the best thing that America has to contribute to make America great.
Right. Yeah. Well, on that note, we'll leave it right there. Thank you so much. Thank you both for joining me tonight. Again, we have so many comments. Let me go through these really quickly. So I have Blanca. She says, America right now, the bruised rose underneath the feet of the enemy. Yeah. She also says, we allowed to be confirmed rather than be transformational. Exactly. So again, this wraps another episode of the 8:30 show. We are all over social media under Metro Conservative Media. Like, share, and leave a comment. And follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. Also, check out our webpage. We are at www.metroconservativemedia.com. We love to get your feedback. I hope to connect with you again next Thursday at the same time. Wishing you warm days and starry nights. Good night.
Good night.